Welcome back, everybody. So today's going to be a bit of a shorter video just because I'm kind of short on time this week. I got some exams to deal with for school, but I just wanted to hop on and give my 10 takeaways from week 2 of the 2021 CFL season. So we'll get right into it. At number 1, I have Mike Reilly is healthy, apparently. So this was such a weird situation again this week, like it was in week 1. And Reilly, when I saw him throw week 1, it's like he couldn't throw a spiral to save his life. And this week he really comes out and he just slings the ball around all over the yard, looks like his old self. And if the Lions have this Mike Reilly, they could be one of the best teams in the league easily this year, I think. Especially with the way they were protecting him in this game. I know it's against the really bad Calgary Stampeders pass rush, but I don't want to take anything away from the improvements this offensive line looks like they've made so far this season. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how Mike Reilly does these next few weeks, as he looks like he's back to close to 100%, it looks like. At least from a visual standpoint, it doesn't look like he's significantly hindered anymore. Number 2, Lucky Whitehead has made the jump. So in this series, I kind of want to include a player every week that I think has made a big jump this season. And I think one player I'm already pretty confident in saying has made a big jump from his 2019 production is Lucky Whitehead for the BC Lions, who, obviously was primarily a kick returner throughout his career, but this year he's really looked like a more refined receiver. BC is really featuring him in that offense. And I mean, he's really showcasing those explosive capabilities that he shows as a kick returner in the receiving game. And I think he just really fits and completes this BC Lions receiving core that is just extremely talented. And I'm just really excited to see what he does the rest of the season after having back-to-back 100-yard games to begin the year. At number 3, the Stampeders are no longer the CFL gold standard. So I've talked a lot about this offseason about how the Stampeders are a team that has had a tremendous track record over the past 10 to 15 years in the CFL. They've no question been the CFL's model franchise, but it looks like they've kind of lost their luster here a bit. Obviously, Bo Levi Mitchell played terrible against the BC Lions in week 2. 4 interceptions really do speak for themselves. I don't know what he was thinking on a lot of these throws, but apparently I just read something that he was really significantly hindered and is probably going to miss week 3, but who knows with the CFL injury reporting. I just think they've lost too many components from that 2018 Grey Cup winning team. They just don't seem like they have that same veteran leadership. This offensive line is in complete shambles right now. The defensive line looks completely toothless. There's no pass rush whatsoever. I don't know how many times throughout that game against BC that Mike Reilly's just sitting back there with all day to throw, particularly on that throw where he was able to hit Brian Burnham for 60 yards. Just a lack of life right now for the Calgary Stampeders. They don't seem to get any easy yards on offense. The receiving core just doesn't seem like it has the right combination of possession and deep threat kind of guys, at least as of yet. And the Mitchell injury is even more of a bigger blow to this team's chances going forward this season, now in an 0-2 hole, playing Montreal this week. Number 4, Winnipeg is the new CFL gold standard. So Winnipeg looks like the most well-rounded team in the CFL through 2 weeks. And you can argue Saskatchewan as well. Maybe they have a better, more explosive offense. But I think Winnipeg, in terms of just playing complementary football and just top to bottom, the roster, the play in the trenches, they just look like the best team in the CFL right now. And I think a lot of that has to do with the organizational structure that they have. They have a great head coach. They have a really good GM too. Just really good at bringing in these new pieces. They lost a lot of pieces in the secondary this offseason, and that hasn't really shown through 2 weeks. And that's just a credit to all the work that Mike O'Shea and Brian Walters, the GM, they do to recruit these players every offseason. And it's been a remarkable job with the program that they run there. I don't see them being anything less than a top 2 team in the West as we go forward this season, because they're just so well-rounded. They do so many things well. And even though they may not have the most explosive offense in the world, they're able to run the ball effectively. Zach Collaros is able to make a couple good improvisational plays every game that can really break down a defense. And that's really the difference from what they had at the beginning of the 2019 season when they had Matt Nichols, who wasn't really a good play extender, didn't really create any explosive plays, more of just an on-script kind of quarterback. But Collaros has really taken that next step in this offense, and there's a reason why he's still undefeated as the starter for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Number 5. The Argos are talented, but still have one massive question. And we all know what this question is, the quarterback position. And honestly, I don't know if I was Ryan Dinwiddie, who I would start this week. Honestly, like, they both had their moments of faults. When Arbuckle came into the game for a really, really struggling McLeod Bethel Thompson in week 2 against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, he had some moments. He got the offense moving, got them into the end zone for their one score of the game. But there was also a really bad head-scratching interception. And this really just goes back to all of what I was saying in my roster review of the Argos. It all depends on whether this team gets consistent week-to-week quarterback play. McLeod Bethel Thompson is a perfect example of a guy that can get hot one week, and he's kind of like a Ryan Fitzpatrick kind of guy. Like, if you watch the NFL, he can, throw for 300, 400 yards one week, 3 touchdowns, but then can come back and, just be super inaccurate, make a couple bonehead decisions the next week. And that honestly just describes McLeod Bethel Thompson's whole career to this point. Arbuckle, I think I might lean towards starting him, mostly because he's less of a known commodity, obviously, at this point, only starting 7 career CFL games to this point. So we'll see if they go with him. It's just, I don't know if there's a star quarterback here that can lead you to a Grey Cup. And this roster looks pretty darn good, I will add. Look at that defensive line. Their defensive line really held their own against Winnipeg. They didn't let the offensive line for Winnipeg run them over in the run game. And I just think this is a really talented team. There were plays to be made against Winnipeg, but they couldn't make them because the quarterback position was just not up to snub. We'll see how they do going forward, who they decide to go with at quarterback, but it's a massive question for this team going forward. Number 6. Montreal has found a pass rush. Honestly, this Montreal team was pretty darn good in 2019, and you look at what Vernon Adams was able to accomplish. He picked up right where he left off at the end of 2019, developing into this star CFL quarterback. The improvisational skills just so good in terms of being an off-script quarterback, but he's improving the on-script aspect. But the one thing dragging this team down was their defense. And primarily the problem with their defense in 2019 is because they didn't have any kind of pass rush. Honestly, even though you may look at the statistics, he may not have had a super impactful game aside from the 1 sack. Almondo Sewell, in his first game with the Alouettes, really did provide that spark for this defense on the inside. I evaluated a lot of CFL game film in 2019, and honestly, I thought Sewell was the most impactful play-to-play defensive lineman in the CFL. I think he's just a very high-motor player, could have stuffed the run up inside, can provide a lot of pass rush upside, command double teams. You just look at the pass rush they were able to provide against Edmonton. Granted, Edmonton's offensive line is not very good right now, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But Montreal just looked leaps and bounds better from a pass rushing standpoint than they did in 2019, and that is just a huge development for this team. Michael Wakefield, Nick Usher, Antonio Simmons all played excellent in week 2 against Edmonton, and I'm really excited to see what this team can do now with a good pass rush. They may still have some questions in the secondary, but having a pass rush really does give you a fighting chance against some of these more explosive offenses, especially when you look around the league and the offensive line play is just not very good so far this year. So really huge development for Montreal. They were insanely impressive in week 2. Can't wait to see what they do against Calgary this Friday. Number 7. Seriously, what is going on in Alberta? This ELKS team is just failing on so many levels, and we'll talk about a few of these things. So obviously you have Trevor Harris, who's arguably been the worst quarterback in the league through 2 weeks. Just so many passes that should have been picked in week 2 against Montreal. Luckily, Montreal gets called for a roughing the passer penalty that brings back an interception, but there are so many other close calls that he had. I don't know what he was seeing on so many of these plays. He's not reading the field very well at the degree that I thought he was capable of. He's not the most physically talented quarterback in the world, but I thought the edge that he had was he's a quick processor, he's really smart at getting the ball out of his hands quickly, and can hit that occasional deep shot down the field to keep the defense honest. but he's not doing any of that this season, and it's very concerning from a guy that I thought was going to really take control this season, being comfortable in this Jamie Elizondo offense. I'm very disappointed in Trevor Harris through 2 weeks, but there's time to turn it around, which leads me to the second thing, is that the offensive line has been a complete disaster as well. They desperately need Sir Vincent Rogers and Kyle Saxelid back. They've been really banged up with injuries, haven't been able to get onto the field so far this year, and that has really hurt this offense. Trevor Harris is a guy who's a pocket passer. He desperately needs really, really good protection in the pocket, and they're just not giving that to him right now. Even though a lot of these throws are on him, he needs to get better protection from this offensive line up front, which leads me to the final thing, which is honestly probably the biggest culprit so far this season, is that the coaching has been a complete disaster. I didn't think Edmonton would get worse going from Jason Moss, who, albeit is a very good offensive play caller, but wasn't very good in terms of the coaching aspect, in terms of making sure the players were disciplined, calling good plays situationally. But Jamie Elizondo has been a complete disaster. He had one terrible challenge where he challenged ruling on the field of a recovered fumble by Edmonton, but there was no video evidence of Edmonton even recovering the ball. The evidence was that Montreal covered the ball. Even though it was a fumble, there was no evidence that Edmonton even remotely was able to win that challenge. Yet he throws the challenge flag early in the game, loses the timeout, loses the challenge for the rest of the game. Just absolutely baffling to me. And another thing is that they haven't been running any design plays for Greg Ellingson, who I think is just super important for Trevor Harris to feel comfortable in this offense. He's been with him in his entire career, basically, dating back for the last 5 years, and they basically haven't been using them. Greg Ellingson only had 1 target for 1 yard in week 2, and it's really disappointing. I think maybe this Darrell Walker addition has really forced Trevor Harris to target him more often and take away from Greg Ellingson's targets, and I don't think that's necessarily a good thing, because I think Greg Ellingson fits much better for who Trevor Harris is as a quarterback than Darrell Walker is, even though Darrell Walker is obviously a fantastic player. So I've had a lot of problems with the play calling and the decision making from this coaching staff through week 2, and honestly, I don't know how it's going to get any better. I'm really hoping it does, because I had such high hopes for this team. I think it's a very talented team on paper, but they look like an organizational mess at this point, and we'll have to see how they react in week 3. Number 8. Fajardo looks like the early MOP favorite. Honestly, Cody Fajardo, going into this season, I always knew that this was a high possibility of happening. When I did my roster review series, I only ranked the Rough Riders 5th in terms of the quarterback position, because we hadn't seen it for more than 1 season in the CFL. But when you actually look at Cody Fajardo play, the potential is just so immense, and I would say he's easily the most talented quarterback right now in the CFL. You look at size, he has the mobility, the accuracy, the leadership. There's so many things to like about Cody Fajardo, and he's really putting it all together through the first 2 weeks. He's being accurate, he's making decisions on time, he's making decisions out of structure, which I thought was kind of his weakness. When the play broke down, he wasn't necessarily the best at doing that in 2019, but he's gotten a lot better at doing that through the first couple weeks this season, and he looks easily, in my opinion, like the MOP frontrunner so far this year. Number 9. Braylon Addison is a vital piece to the Tiger Cats offense. So you might be wondering why Braylon Addison, a guy that didn't even play the first couple weeks, is in the thumbnail for today's video. And there are a lot of problems with the Tiger Cats through the first 2 weeks this season. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. As a Tiger Cats fan, it's been a disaster, mainly the offensive line issues. But I'm going to take a different angle with this, because I think Braylon Addison has kind of been the guy that's been overlooked in terms of the absences on the Tiger Cats so far this season. Yeah, you can look at elsewhere in the receiving core. They got some other good pieces. Obviously, Brandon Banks, the best player on this team, hasn't really performed. 2 huge fumbles through the first 2 weeks. Jalen Ackland's played pretty well, but I think the guy that they're really missing is Braylon Addison, who honestly was just as good, in my opinion, as Brandon Banks was in 2019. Just didn't get the credit for it. A guy that is very versatile. They use him in a variety of ways. They even use him in the backfield sometimes. I just think Addison's just super important for the pacing of this offense, to get them moving down the field, moving the chains. Banks is more of the guy that will create the explosive plays for him, but Addison is just so important for the consistency, the pacing of this offense, and they really need him back soon if they want any chance of making a run. Number 10. offensive line play is the main factor in the low-scoring games so far this season. So there have been a lot of talk about how the quality of football has kind of been lacking through the first couple weeks, and honestly, this is to be expected with no preseason. These guys haven't played in so long. They haven't seen live action. They desperately needed a couple games to really get the feet under them. And the defenses are always ahead of the offenses at this time of year. But I think the main reason why we're seeing so many low-scoring games so far this season is honestly the bad play on that offensive line. There's been some talk about the quarterbacks not being up to snub. But I think the main reason why the quarterbacks are struggling is because they're not having much time to throw. You look at Hamilton, you look at Calgary, Edmonton, all these teams that have struggled so far this season, even Ottawa in their one win, they've really struggled to protect the quarterback, even give them any sort of time. And it really goes back to a big idea about how offensive lines are now not having as much time due to like contact rules about practice. They're not having as many reps in terms of practice, physically blocking, and you really do need those at those line positions to get that chemistry, play a certain amount of snaps together. And they basically didn't get any live reps before this season. And it's really shown. They've come in cold. They're getting beat off the edge, especially these tackle positions, which are very challenging to play with all of the great defensive ends that we have here in the CFL in 2021. It's been a struggle for these tackles. I think they're going to catch up as the season goes on, as they get better conditioned, figure out more ways to pick up blitzes. But yes, I think offensive line play has really suffered so far this season, and it's going to be an interesting thing to watch going forward. And I think if those positions get better around the league collectively, we'll see higher scoring CFL games pretty soon. But that is going to be the end of today's video, ladies and gentlemen. I wanted to thank each and every one of you for watching. Once again, my name is Jason. If you want to support the show, the best way to do it is by hitting that like button and subscribing to Aussie's Huddle for more CFL content just like this. Be sure to let me know in the comment section what you take away from week 2. And with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.